will find a place for our institutions in the initiative. You know, this thing has been going on for just a few years, and some people have cursed the initiative, some people have blessed the initiative. It depends on the angle from which you're looking at it. Some have said the Belt and Road Initiative is another form of colonialism by the Chinese this time, and some feel it's a very good way of getting funds, much needed funds, into Africa. The Belt and Road Initiative has gone through at least 37 countries in Africa, in many areas: food, construction, infrastructure, and they're estimating that at some point in time, $1 trillion would have gone into the initiative. So there's so much to do for each and every one of us as dispute resolvers. I always say that where business money goes, disputes go. So if disputes go there, we are needed. So how do we find our space in the initiative? I mean, I have these very 4 brilliant panelists who all know a lot about it. I will introduce them, but I will just introduce them. You can read more about them on the Whova app. Mr. Tony Ejikanye. Mr. Tony Ejikanye is not a lawyer. So if we were doing that odd one out game, and they say who is the odd one out, in a sense, it would be Mr. Ejikanye, because he's not a lawyer. He's an accountant, an auditor, a financial analyst, but he's worked a lot on the Belt and Road Initiative. He's been involved in the Belt and Road Initiative Chamber of Commerce. They have a Chamber of Commerce, an international Chamber of Commerce. He's been involved in it. He's been involved in getting Nigeria and Africa in the Chamber of Commerce. So you can understand that he would have some tips to tell us how to also get on the road, since he's already on the road, you know. So Mr. Ejikanye, you're welcome. Mr. Etomi, I mean, we all know him. I call him Uncle George. He's a lawyer, but he's also done a lot of work in international trade and finance. And if you're working in international trade and finance, then you would have touched China and done business with them. Not as a trader, but as a lawyer and a dispute resolver. So Uncle George, you're welcome. Dr. Blake, when we started, you can see all the books, you know, he's an arbitrator, a dispute resolver. He's dealt in a lot of international arbitration, and international arbitration also particularly in the Asian region, which tends towards China. And so, you know, he's dealt also with a lot of institutions, and he'll be telling us about how institutions are involved in the Belt and Road Initiative. You know, institutions in South Africa, institutions in Dubai, institutions in other parts of the world. So sort of from the international slant, and perhaps how African institutions can also get more involved. Professor Mohammed Abdul Wahab. Professor Mohammed Abdul Wahab is practically one of us. He's been on several of our webinars this year in this pandemic, and so most of us know him. He's a professor from Cairo, works involved with the Cairo Regional Center, with the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators. He's actually in charge of the diploma now, you know, so he's also very involved in the Belt and Road Initiative. He's done arbitrations involving the Belt and Road Initiative. So all these are people who are very much involved, who understand this initiative very well. And I think that it would be very helpful for those of us attending this panel, me inclusive, you know, to listen very well. I think there's a lot we will learn from them to find our own way. I said to them, you know, I want to get on the road. There must be a piece of the pie for me on the road, and I want to get there. So thank you very much to my panelists. We're going to use a question and answer format so that we can get as much as possible from each and every one of them. So once again, I want to thank you. My coordinator, Mr. Mohammed Adelodun, he's somewhere because I've told him if anything happens, he has to be ready to step in. Uncle George will be leaving us at 10 o'clock or maybe a few minutes to 10, but we'll all be together with the other people to the end of the program. So once again, thank you, everybody. And I'll be starting with Mr. Ejikanye. Yes, Mr. Ejikanye, Please, can you give us an overview? And that's why it's important. We need to have an overview of this Belt and Road Initiative. What is it all about?
Thank you very much, Shola, for having me. I will really say that I'm honored and privileged to be among such eminent panelists. I'll first and foremost give a little background on what the Belt and Road Initiative actually is. The Belt and Road Initiative is actually China's attempt to build an alternative economic bloc to the Western Bloc led by the IBRD or the World Bank. You know, the Western economy controls virtually everything we are doing in the financial market at now. So, but with China growing every day in leaps and bounds, they feel they should have their own bloc. And of course, they have the resources to do that. So some years ago, because I was the immediate past president of Abuja Chamber of Commerce, so we were involved in setting up the Silk Road Chamber of International Commerce. Actually, it was a prelude. SRCIC was a prelude before the BRI, that is the Belt and Road Initiative. The Chamber of Commerce was set up about a year or two before the Belt and Road Initiative came into place. So the BRI was based on reactivating the ancient Silk Road that has its beginning centuries ago with roots starting in the ancient city of Xi'an. For you gentlemen and ladies that like to travel, Xi'an is a very, very interesting and wonderful place to visit. Actually, I visited about 4 times over the past 6 years. So actually the Belt and Road or the Silk Road started from Xi'an and ended somewhere in Azerbaijan. And currently now, China has built railway lines or are running railway lines across this Silk Road to major cities in Europe. So the alternative to shipping goods by sea is going through these land borders, which takes about maybe from Xi'an to a place like Frankfurt will take them about 2 weeks to ship containers. So, but the most important thing with this Belt and Road or the ancient city of Xi'an is historically it has been a cosmopolitan city rich with various nationalities, ethnicities, and religions, unlike the rest of China. So we'll be making a mistake when we say like the Chinese are not receptive to foreign investment or foreign businesses. The city of Xi'an over the centuries has been accepting businesses. So it's actually different from the rest of China. So that's where the Chinese wants to portray. But I believe also that they are not giving out, there's a lot of communication gap. A lot of people don't even actually understand what they want to do. So the numerous courses I attended there was to actually get their own perspective on what they expect the businessmen or people that want to do business in the BRI, what are the expectations? But just like Shola said, all of us want to be part of the, want to get on the road. But then we want to get on the road. How do we get into this road? What are expectations from the Chinese? And what are the Chinese expecting from us? I also believe that for us to enter into this road is we have to get more information, especially from the Silk Road Chamber of International Commerce, SRCIC. Now, there are organizations like in China called the CCPIT. CCPIT means China Chamber of International Commerce, and CCOIC. These are chambers of commerce in China, but you also have to understand that unlike other countries, China is unique in the sense that they are not on the left, they are not on the right, they try to stay in the middle. So that is why you see some of their businesses. It has part government ownership and part private ownership. So their Chamber of Commerce is not like the one you see in Africa or in Nigeria, where it is completely private. So in China, yes?
No, just 30 seconds more.
Okay, so in China, the Chamber of Commerce is part government and part private. So I believe that for us to get onto the road, we have to get more information on these organizations I just mentioned, SRCIC, CCPIT, and CCOIC. Already the CCPIT and CCOIC have arbitration centers already handling thousands of international cases between Chinese firms and the rest of the world. So I believe that they will form part of the process. Thank you very much, Shola.
Thank you. Uncle George, do you have anything to add to the overview, to the history of the Belt and Road Initiative, how it started, where it's going, how much has been involved?
Yes, thank you. First of all, let me thank the organizers for inviting me here. Thanks to my fellow panelists, and congratulations to the CII for a great conference. Just to take off from where Tony left things, you know, the Chinese Action Plan highlights as one of its key objectives in the first phase of the implementation of the BRI, the construction of a physical infrastructure network to reconnect Asia, Europe, and Africa over land and link East and West via a network of sea routes. There are many questions about a legal and policy framework that will govern this initiative. And we believe that there's so much by way of transnational transactions will come out of this initiative. Key among these questions is effective dispute resolution mechanism, because you can't have this sort of humongous plan by the Chinese spanning across several countries and several legal systems and not find a way of having a robust mechanism for resolving disputes. Now, it is important. I know one of the questions we ask ourselves is, how do we key in? How do we get benefit from it? I'm not too interested in the politics behind why China is doing what they're doing. What is most important for me is that much needed capital for development is available, especially for African countries. It will simply be one of the choices we have, whether we're getting funding from the West or from anywhere else. It really doesn't matter too much to me. But the key thing then is, how do we then make ourselves attractive enough for these investments to thrive? Because ask any businessman or anybody who wants to invest in a territory, they ask you two key questions. How do I get in and how do I get out? Getting in involves understanding and creating certainty in your investment laws that create the enabling climate for the investment to be made. How do I get out? Would include divestment laws. And one of those mechanisms is dispute resolution. So for those who want to be attractive to the BRI, you must then have dispute resolution mechanisms that will make it attractive for that sort of capital to come and for people to benefit from it.
Okay.
Correct.
Uncle George, thank you. There'll still be time to explore this in detail, but I would like Dr. Blake to just give us something about the BRI from his perspective, and Professor Abdul Wahab would also speak to the BRI, an overview. Dr. Blake?
Oh, well, thank you very much, Sola, and thank you very much for the co-panelists for their contributions, but also thank you very much, evidently, to the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators in Nigeria for the kind invitation for me to speak here today. Now, as regards the Belt and Road initiative, I think what is very important, and we've heard it already from Tony and George, is essentially that disputes can arise from the various BI projects that are underway at all sorts of levels. And I think it's important to bear in mind that disputes can arise in various sector-specific areas. We could have evidently disputes arising from construction projects, especially to the extent that we are dealing with large infrastructure projects financed on the 21st century Silk Road. But there could just as well be insurance disputes. There could be as well supply distribution disputes that arise from the implementation of these projects. So we could be faced with more or less ordinary international commercial arbitration disputes to some sense. But also, I believe it's important to highlight that the BRI is not limited to the overland Silk Road, but it also has got a maritime component to it. And it's predictable that there will be a host of maritime disputes probably arising from the initiative as we go forward with its implementation.
Thank you. Prof.
Yes, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here, Professor Sola and all my colleagues. Delighted to be participating and interacting with all of you. Having heard Tony and Dr. Blanke, my friend, I could not but agree actually with all what they say. And in fact, having heard Tony, he is not the odd one out. He is the wise one out in what he said. So briefly, so I will tell you something to put it in concrete terms. The BRI at present, we're talking about, it involves about almost 3,000 projects. So 2,951, valued at about $3.8 trillion are well underway. And more than 2,630 companies involved. In July 2020, which is during the pandemic, 84 new projects related to the Belt and Road initiatives were unveiled. And these projects alone were valued at something in excess of $52.5 billion. At present, because I see that there's some interest in the questions and amongst the participants about the types of disputes, well, the types of disputes are informed by the sectors. And at present, the transportation sector, not surprisingly, dominates with almost 50% of all projects, amounting to $1.9 trillion, $1.9 trillion. And the power and water sectors come second with about 22.7% at $861 billion. And then the oil and gas and mining, actually interesting, of course, for Africa, is about 5% of the oil projects. But the interesting thing for Africa, to put more context into that, is that amongst the top 10 nations that have been receiving the largest BRI-related investments, it features two African countries, Egypt and Nigeria. And by the way, the Nigerians, or Nigeria is the latest entrant, having replaced Belarus in the top 10. Egypt joined the BRI in 2017 and Nigeria in 2018. Again, the latest news regarding BRI-related investments is on the 23rd of November, 2020, the Egyptian government signed 2 agreements with the Chinese consortium regarding the light rail project, linking parts of Cairo with the new administrative capital. It's a Chinese-funded development project with a fund standing at $1.8 billion. Nigeria, on the other hand, recorded tremendous success in the trade volume between Nigeria and China. Perhaps this is of interest to all businesses and dispute resolvers and users of dispute resolution. It is now the trade volume is soaring at $15.3 billion and that is the 2018 statistics between Nigeria and China alone, which is 10.8% higher than 2017. On the continent, we have 44 African countries that signed MOUs regarding the BRI partnership. China has committed a lot in relation to Africa. In fact, the Chinese trade with Africa rose by 19.7%, whereas the overall increase with the Chinese trade with the other parts of the world were only at 12%. In East Africa, which is again an interesting area for the BRI initiative, there are many funded projects in relation to infrastructure in Kenya, the Nairobi-Mombasa Standard Rail Line, the Ethiopia, the Addis-Djibouti Standard Rail Line, and the Tazara Railway linking Port City and Dar es Salaam in Tanzania. In July 2020, Kenya witnessed 3 new projects added, valued at $7.8 billion, with China's growing interest in the renewables sector in Africa. Now, the forecast, based on the latest information, is that China intends to increase its investments in relation to the BRI by 14% annually over the next 2 years, with total investments doubling from 1.2 to 1.3 trillion by 2027. One thing that I would advise those who have an interest in the BRI with specific twist in relation to construction is the Belt and Road Initiative, Legal Risks and Opportunities. It's a 264 pages report relating to across the board all matters regarding Chinese engineering contractors operating overseas, which is of great interest to Africa. It is a publication by CLOR, and it is actually by the Permanent Forum of China Construction Law 2019. In essence, there is a lot to be said. What I say is that we need to look at a number of angles. There will be increased activity in relation to infrastructure and projects, and that comes hand in hand with disputes. But I'm afraid that the traditional way of dealing with disputes will not fit the BRI. There will be completely out of the box elements with integration of information technology, dispute prevention, and dispute management techniques, because disputes relating to the BRI, be it...
Prof, I didn't want to stop you because I also wanted to have all that information. I'm sure everybody wants that information. When you kept giving the numbers, it was like ting, 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 ting in my ears. And I'm thinking, uh-oh, all this money, so many disputes must follow it. And there must be some space for each and every one of us. Thank you very much for all that information. I'm thinking 3.8 trillion here, 52.5 billion there. It's happening in Nigeria, which brings me to a poll I had asked them to put up. Now, I'm sure a lot of people are going to scream. Well, let me not say whether people are going to say yes or no. There was a time there was something about a national policy on arbitration. And there was a webinar I attended on a national policy on arbitration in Nigeria, asking whether or discussing whether arbitration that has to do with contracts in Nigeria must compulsorily be held in Nigeria. And, people said yes and no, and it would be nice to hear what people have to say. So, Dr. Agbelusi, please, can you put up the poll? Because hearing all this and knowing that a lot of these contracts are also in Nigeria, I imagine at least 100, 200, 300 billion would end up being spent in Nigeria from the initiative. Should we insist that any dispute that arises out of a contract happening in Nigeria must be arbitrated, mediated, or litigated in Nigeria? Or should we just do as arbitration normally is? Parties are free to choose where they want the arbitration. Parties are free to choose where they want their mediation. Please put up the poll and let's hear what people have to say. Should we insist? Of course, if we insist, then it means all the arbitration stays in Africa or all the arbitration stays in Nigeria. Is it a good idea to have such a national policy, or should we let things be? Thank you. And we'll move on. This has been very interesting, even up to now. And I'm going to please ask Uncle George to just say something. He's already started, but I want him to say something before he leaves us. He's leaving us. Oops. Uncle George, please, just 1 minute.
In 25 minutes.
Oh, okay. Oh, so good. Good. And now is there a need, and Prof had started saying something about it. Is there a need to develop a particular dispute resolution mechanism for BRI? Because Prof has also said it may not be business as usual. What African dispute resolution mechanisms are available for transactions arising from the BRI? So do we want to, for contracts in Africa, BRI contracts in Africa, do we want to have a certain model of dispute resolution? Is there a need to develop a particular mechanism? Uncle George?
Yeah, if you ask me, we can strive, as it were, to develop a particular mechanism for it. But the truth is that even within the initiative, the Chinese are not particular about having one particular system of dispute resolution. They actually attract all forms of dispute resolution. They're not leaning towards any particular one. In the end, it is how attractive your dispute resolution mechanism is that will make you competitive. For example, there are so many things in our inherent cultural systems for dispute resolution that are so similar to what the Chinese have. Like we know in Africa, the involvement of the wise people, good officers, elders, have produced faster and more, let me say, agreeable results when disputes arise than the formal courts, the formal systems that involve going to court and with all the time that it takes. Now, if you have a dispute resolution mechanism that incorporates these sort of methods, it will definitely make you competitive. And this would be therefore calling our dispute resolution centers to begin to tweak their dispute resolution mechanisms to accommodate this. Then it becomes very attractive. Now, if I move quickly to the question you asked, should there be a national policy? My heart tells me there should be, but my head tells me that since arbitration or dispute settlement procedures is simply part of your overall legal system, then if you don't have a system by which resolved disputes are enforced, by which there's certainty, you will not be competitive, because dispute resolution doesn't just end in the arbitration venue. It goes on to enforcement. And this is where many African countries fall short. And this is why you see this penchant for saying, let's go elsewhere. And that's also tied to our political systems. So we must continue to adopt those principles that enable us be attractive. I have been involved in arbitrations in which, embarrassingly, I was in London once, when you are Yoruba, so you understand the concept of dobale, prostrate. Now, it was adduced in evidence that one of the parties prostrated before the other party. And that was being interpreted, as it were, to mean an admission that he was guilty. And I was just lucky to have been the only African. This was a dispute concerning Nigeria. I was the only Nigerian in that. I had to quickly interject to say, that's not what it means. Dobale is the traditional way younger people pay respect to older people. It has nothing to do with whether or not they are guilty. Now, if I was not there, I could have imagined that the panel may have been convinced to admit that as guilt. Now, these are the kind of things we lose when we don't have robust systems here that can make us compete. So to go straight to the point, I would like for there to be a national policy, but this would depend largely on how ready we are to compete. Everything you find across the world today, many centers are racing to be competitive. For example, look at the Cairo Center. It's recognized by the AFDB for dispute resolution. So that's the sort of standards we should begin to set for ourselves. I look forward to that day when the Lagos Center for Arbitration, we also have the one by the Chamber of Commerce. I look forward to that day when they can make their case to be attractive enough for these disputes to come here.
Okay, I would like the other panelists to say something to that, but I seem to be hearing you say that culture might actually play a part in these BRI disputes. But I'd like to hear what the other panelists have to say. Let me start with Dr. Blake.
Yes, thank you very much, Sola. I entirely agree with Mohammed and George on the point that some of the dispute resolution offerings that are available in the market today need to be adapted to the requirements of disputes that arise, certainly at the higher sort of level of the BI initiative. I do believe that a lot of disputes will arise and are arising from the BI that can be dealt with by the dispute resolution offerings that are currently available. If you are, however, in a dispute, let's say with a Chinese counterparty, then of course one may have to consider to what extent the Chinese, for example, are familiar with the ways of arbitration in the West, to what extent they are familiar with the ways of ADR that are of implementation in the West and frequent use in the West. And I think in that context, you will find that the Chinese are very much in favor of ADR mediation conciliation practices, and they would like to explore avenues of negotiation and soft forms of dispute resolution before escalating to either litigation, meaning the courts, or indeed a litigious form of ADR like arbitration. And I believe that even though in the West we are not unfamiliar with those principles, we definitively do not necessarily have in place by default multi-tier dispute resolution clauses. Very often we have clauses that simply provide for a straightforward avenue to arbitration. You look at most of the model clauses that are published by arbitration institutions in the West, be it the ICC, be it the LCIA, be it also, if we look here at the Middle East, in the UAE, for example, the DIFC, LCIA, the DIAC, all the dispute resolution clauses that are published for general guidance to submit a dispute to arbitration under those rules will just focus on the arbitration element. It does not create a multi-tiered dispute resolution clause that allows parties to blindly contract into a multi-tier package of dispute resolution, including a mediation option prior to resorting to arbitration. Not to mention, evidently, the possibility of having a MED-ARB hybrid or ARB-MED hybrid, which I understand is something that is regularly practiced in China, but certainly not in our parts of the world. So I think there is leeway for designing arbitration and dispute resolution provisions more generally that will cater for use in BRI disputes. So I think, and the focus must be, I believe, on a multi-tiered dispute resolution rather than just arbitration as a one-stop shop. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Ejikanye. What do you say to a cultural slant? Because that's the way I see it too. That's Mr. Tony Ejikanye, a cultural slant to the issue of the BRI disputes. We've heard that the Chinese are they tend more to mediation, conciliation. And so how can we merge that with sorry, the video keeps going off. How can we merge that with the development of the BRI and disputes in Nigeria and in Africa? Mr. Ejikanye. Hello?
Hello, thank you very much, Shola.
Yes.
Yeah, what makes this discussion very interesting is that someone like Georgie, to me, Dr. Blake and Professor Mohammed made answering this question very, very easy. Like they've already laid the framework. Now, from my own understanding of the Chinese, and with all the data and statistics Professor Mohammed has laid out, China cannot invest so much in Africa and the rest of the world without the need to make sure nothing goes wrong. So, and for them, they're very much inclined to mediation. I have a story to tell. I was inside a car in China. The driver collided with another car. In less than 10 minutes, they were able to resolve their problem. Money exchanged hands immediately. In less than 10 minutes. So I was asking the driver, how did you manage to settle this issue so fast? He said they know they have less than 10 minutes before the police comes. Because if the police comes, it brings in a lot of trouble and complications, which two of them do not want. So their own culture is more inclined towards settlement of disputes outside the courts. And just like my esteemed George Itomi said, in the Nigerian culture, we also incline towards that. But now the issue is now, how do you now marry these two cultures together? How do you come to a midpoint? At which point do we follow the Chinese way, or at which point do we follow the African way? And I believe the Chinese, they have a lot more to lose from those investments if there is no organized or predicated way of settling disputes. So I believe that they will be more inclined towards mediation and arbitration. But also have to say this. There was an issue George Itomi raised about the investments coming in, whether it comes in from the West or it comes in from China. One of the mistakes the African countries do is they're in a hurry to take in investments without looking at the electoral print. The government of African countries do not use professional negotiators to negotiate for contracts. So I also believe that it's not just for lawyers like yourselves to wait till the problem actually arises. Lawyers should go into the proper drawing of the agreement even before the contract starts, because that is where the problem actually starts. Because we are so much in a hurry to get that money, we forget to do a lot of things. And in business, you don't get what you deserve. You get what you negotiate. I keep saying that to
that's true.
My people in government. So it's very, very important for we to do this thing. Thank you, Shola.
We need to look at it right from the beginning. What are we negotiating? Or mediation, arbitration. We have to put in the proper dispute resolution mechanisms from the beginning. Prof, any more figures, even from the cultural context? I love those figures.
Thank you very much, Professor Sola. I think there are questions and I'm very much looking forward to the Q&A part, but let me briefly say the following. On culture, we need to look at it from a number of angles that cater to our needs. First of all, national cultures. Africa is very rich in terms of culture, and the Chinese culture is also very rich. And when we look at it from the perspective of national cultures, generally and their perceptions towards dispute resolution. In Africa, for example, in certain parts of Africa, we have a sort of a high adversarial culture, which leads to more litigation and arbitration side. Whereas on the Asian side, it's more on dispute avoidance, dispute resolution amicably. And so it's more on the mediation, dispute avoidance type of things. So we have to, these clash of approaches culturally will manifest itself in relation to the BRI. And when we look at that, and that's what I think the innovation that the BRI brings, let me give you a real life scenario, is that imagine a rail line passing through the Belt and Road Initiative in a number of countries. Surely if a dispute arises in one segment of that rail line and a tribunal is put in place, there will be issues and restraints in relation to tribunal's findings as to whether the contract will be terminated so that the project is discontinued or not. Because discontinuing this segment means that the rail line will not be completed in many other jurisdictions. So that is why we see now in the contracts related to BRI references that any tribunals or any dispute resolvers will have to look into the broader spectrum of the project, bearing in mind the BRI vision and project completion elements. So that is a factor that will restrain arbitral discretion, assuming we're looking into arbitration, in relation to findings that may impact the pathway of certain projects. Now, with that in mind, we've also seen an initiative about establishing the China-Africa Joint Arbitration Center in 2015 in Johannesburg, with presence in Johannesburg and Shanghai. There is also reference to potentially having another presence in Kenya, in Cairo, and other hubs in Africa. To answer your question about the Nigerian and the Paul, I think part of the misconceptions we have is that the localization of disputes nationally will have a positive impact on the dispute resolution culture. And I would beg to differ. It will have a regressive effect on the elements of investments because people at present look into a neutral venue in a way. And so what Nigeria, Egypt, and the others could do is develop arbitration centers, arbitration hubs that will not cater for the local segments of the BRI elements of the project, but for rather the regional segments with which they are not associated. So for example, Nigerian dispute resolution centers can look into elements related to Tanzania, Kenya, South Africa, and the like, because they are more of a neutral venue there with the cultural dimension of localization into an African context. But that in mind, we have to build into our model of dispute resolution factors relating to IT-oriented dispute resolution processes, the new generation, because China is at the forefront of artificial intelligence. And if we're not keeping up with the pace with that, we will lag behind and we will not have access to these types of disputes. The final thing I will say in this respect is that China is very much interested in Africa, and they have taken a decision to translate anything related to African laws, codes, precedents, culture to better understand. And they have even incentivized African countries to modernize their saga of investment-related laws, be it company investment, bankruptcy, arbitration laws, and this is happening across the continent. And I think now is an opportune moment is for us not just to replicate existing experience of dispute practices, but make a quantum leap into the future by leading the way of having a proper infrastructure for disputes with an element of information and communication technology that can be integrated to expedite the avoidance, management, and resolution of disputes in relation to BRI, because that is the future.
Thank you very much, Prof. I mean, this is all
Sola, can I just quickly say, if I may just support Professor Abdul Wahab Mohammed, evidently, in what he just said, I think some institutions have tried to foray into that sort of area in terms of, bringing dispute resolution, especially arbitration and mediation related into the 21st century, not only driven evidently by the current pandemic, but we have the initiative by the Hong Kong International Arbitration Center, I believe, which is called EBRAM, and which is essentially a fully developed online mediation and arbitration platform. And I think if these sorts of initiatives could be married up with establishing a framework of rules that would sort of meet the requirements of the BRI, that could take us a far way. And also from my own experience in my adopted home jurisdiction here in the UAE, you have, for example, the ADGM Arbitration Center, Abu Dhabi Global Market Arbitration Center, which is a virtual arbitration venue and offers equally particular electronic platforms for case management, hearings, and the conduct of arbitration and ADR proceedings more generally, for use in those proceedings anywhere in the world, really. So anybody can essentially get access to these platforms and use them for their own dispute resolution. Thank you.
Thank you.
Shall if you don't mind, can I just intervene for 2 minutes? Because
I know because you are leaving. Yes, I know you are leaving. Please.
I just wanted to take on something Prof said about trying to particularize dispute resolution mechanism in your country because these disputes may not be Nigeria specific. I don't think that was what we were referring to. We're just saying that for us to get a little bit of the pie, there must be a recognition that arbitration centers that are developing along the B and BRI belt should be patronized, if you can call it that way. So such that, because I get back to the point, Shola, you were making, how do we get benefits out of all these? These investments are coming here, some are coming by way of loans, some are direct investments. We must, even through making the investments work for us, also be part of a mechanism by which disputes that arise from out of them can be resolved. I mean, we know of wholly Nigerian disputes that are resolved in London, or in New York or somewhere. I think if the case would be for Africa to develop viable dispute resolution centers that will then become attractive and make a good case for them to participate in the BRI. And I'd like to end on that note. Thank you, panelists, for not being there till the end. I look forward to meeting all of you sometime in the future.
Sometime in the physical world. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
And thank you for raising the issues on culture. I mean, this is very interesting, you know, all what I'm hearing and learning. I'm just seeing so many opportunities for individuals, opportunities for institutions, new directions for institutions, new directions for individuals in this world of BRI. I mean, I'm sure there are a lot of people who are thinking, okay, so this is a new way we need to start looking at in 2021. I would also like to ask my panelists, if you can, you've been talking about different institutions, different chambers of commerce, different name them, websites that are helpful for people to look into. If you can please type them and put them in the chat box so that people can go away and use that to develop themselves, look at new institutions they may want to join, new panels they may want to join that they did not know about before. I think it would be very helpful if you can please put all those different names, the chambers of commerces of the Belt and Road Initiative, in the chat box so that people can take their time later and go and look at it. So we continue. I mean, I think for me, it's been very, very interesting. I've found out things that I'm thinking of many things, and I'm thinking there must be a place for me in all of this. And I'm sure many people are thinking about it too. You know, someone had asked about even what place for law firms. How can law firms get involved? But I'll go on now to Dr. Blake, and we would be talking about international institutions in more detail. You know, how have international institutions responded to the BRI? When we know how they have responded or how they are responding, it would help African institutions to know which new directions to take concerning the BRI. So, you know, how can the Middle East and in particular the UAE and in particular Africa, you know, how can we make new offerings for BRI disputes, BRI projects? There's so much of it in our jurisdiction that we have to be involved. You know, it can't all be left just to the ICCs and to the LCIAs. You know, how have these big international institutions responded, Dr. Blake, and how can African institutions also respond? I know that Prof talked just a few minutes ago about how we can even have offerings to just local African regions. So generally, Dr. Blake, how have they responded and how can we respond?
Well, Sola, they have responded in very different ways ultimately, but I think if you just take the usual culprits, taking a look, for example, at the ICC, we are all familiar with, they have established a Belt and Road Commission to promote the existing ICC ADI and arbitration offering for the resolution of Belt and Road disputes. So the Commission itself addresses dispute resolution opportunities arising from the BI in both China and beyond, and they really aim to engage all relevant stakeholders, including corporates, state-owned enterprises, governments, in all Belt and Road jurisdictions. And they regularly organize events also to sort of sensitize the region to dispute resolution facilities for use in Belt and Road disputes. Now, the Commission places in particular focus on developing ADR standards within the context of infrastructure build and investment matters, given their central importance to the success of the BRI. Now, another initiative taken by the ICC is to establish a representative office in China itself in the Shanghai Free Trade Zone. And it is the first ever international arbitration institution to do so in mainland China. And evidently, the purpose of that is to promote ICC dispute resolution within China. And needless to say that this will also assist the ICC in promoting its existing capabilities for use in Belt and Road disputes. And then finally, the ICC has signed a memorandum of understanding with the Shenzhen Court of International Arbitration, the SCIA, to foster long-term cooperation with them and to make accessible, again, ICC dispute resolution to disputing parties in South China. Again, there is a focus there on dispute resolution with respect to disputes arising from the BRI. This includes also more specifically arrangements to make available to users of ICC arbitration the SCIA's hearing facilities, which are located in the Shenzhen Special Economic Zone, and efforts to hold joint conferences to promote the use and benefits of international arbitration as an attractive alternative to litigation for commercial disputes. So moving on just briefly, and I've touched on that already, to the Hong Kong International Arbitration Center, they have launched a full Belt and Road program. They've set up a Belt and Road Advisory Committee, which is composed of experts in a variety of industry sectors that are relevant to BRI, including evidently infrastructure, construction, as we've heard from Mohammed already, finance, insurance, and maritime. They've also established a BI-specific knowledge database on their respective websites, which disseminates information and data about the BRI and BI projects. Most importantly, I believe, is the initiative of the EBRAM, EBRAM standing for Electronic Belt and Road Arbitration and Mediation. This is, as I mentioned before, briefly commenting on Mohammed's contribution on a related matter, is an online mediation and arbitration platform, which essentially seeks to facilitate the conduct of Belt and Road disputes specifically online. And that includes negotiation and mediation practices that can be conducted electronically. And within this context, interestingly, also the Hong Kong International Arbitration Center has reached out and signed a memorandum of understanding with the Hainan International Arbitration Court in China, and has also contributed more recently to the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation, APAC, collaborative framework for ODR, which lays down rules for online dispute resolution of cross-border business-to-business disputes, and equally seeks to combine mediation and arbitration requirements in a sort of integral dispute resolution package. And finally, interestingly enough, the Hong Kong International Center has endeavored to produce a Belt and Road specific model arbitration clause, which is accessible on their website. Now, interestingly enough, that dispute resolution clause, I believe, is probably not as well suited for BRI related disputes as may have been anticipated. And that's simply because, as I said before, this particular clause does not take into account the tendency in China to really resort to non-contentious forms of dispute resolution before escalating to arbitration. So one would have really wished to see some multi-tier dispute resolution offering there, and in particular a clause that would have provided for initial attempts at amicable settlement, to say the least, negotiation, possibly mediation, before escalating to arbitration. This particular clause does not do so, and does therefore, in my humble opinion, not necessarily reflect the right way forward for a model arbitration clause for the Belt and Road Initiative. Now, one last point of interest probably in this context is the Astana International Arbitration Center, an arbitration center recently established in a financial free zone in Astana, Kazakhstan, right at the buckle really of the BRI. Now, this particular arbitration center, or I should say, this particular financial center to start, in which you find the arbitration center, is modeled on the Dubai International Financial Center, which is equally a financial free zone with its own standalone jurisdiction modeled on the common law legal system and promulgating essentially English substantive law. The AIFC has equally got an autonomous court system, is staffed by common law judges, and includes members of the UK judiciary, is headed up by the famous Lord Woolf as Chief Justice. And the AIFC courts have exclusive jurisdiction disputes arising from matters that have an AIFC nexus or following party agreement, essentially, and they apply English law to disputes before them. Interestingly now, the AIFC has also promulgated its own arbitration law, which are the AIFC Arbitration Regulations 2017. So the AIFC can serve as a seat of arbitration in its own right. And the Astana International Arbitration Center is located in that free zone and has got a set of arbitration rules of its own, which importantly, I believe, within the context of the BRI, is a set of mediation and arbitration rules. So there's an attempt here to marry, the non-contentious and contentious approach to ADR in that particular set of rules, which I believe has been done with the intention in mind to be more attractive as a seat of arbitration ultimately, and also be more attractive as a rules framework for resolution of disputes arising from the BRI. Okay. So I believe on that note, okay, I complete my comments on the role of international institutions and what they've so far taken in terms of initiatives to cater for the BRI disputes. Thank you, Sola.
Thank you, Dr. Blake. Thank you. And this, I'm sure it's pointing to a lot of institutions, and there are people representing. I can see Ikweme from ICAMA, the International Center for Arbitration and Mediation, Abuja, and I'm sure there I can see people, Messi, all the way from Kenya. There are people from all over Africa and possibly all over the world here, some representing institutions. And I think it's giving them ideas. You know, I don't think it's all the institutions, perhaps even very few of the institutions in Africa that have started considering having special offerings for BRI. And at the same, and that's unfortunate because, I mean, from the numbers we heard from Mohammed, there's a lot happening in Africa in BRI. So I would assume that our institutions should begin to think of, you know, what we're going to do with BRI. How are we going to get involved with this Belt and Road Initiative, considering that a lot of the contracts are going to be, or are already happening, not are going to be, already happening in Africa. How can we get involved as institutions? And I would like to then move on to Prof to speak on that. And then, because now we're running short of time, so I'd like Prof to speak on that issue as well, how African institutions can get involved with the BRI. And from there, I'm going to go on to Prof's questions. You know, somebody has asked that already of him about how can African institutions, what is CASICA doing? I know Prof is on the CASICA Council. Does CASICA have any program, any BRI program? Also, any trainings on BRI? You know, Prof, please, let's hear from you.
Thank you very much, Sola. Briefly, let me say the following. We should be aware of our unconscious bias as dispute resolution practitioners when looking at the BRI. The BRI is not a dispute resolution initiative. We have to realize that it's the other way around. Dispute resolution for the BRI serves the needs of the business, the projects, and the users. It is sort of an investment-led initiative, and disputes are the last brick in a way that everyone wants to avoid, but fall squarely on our shoulders and in our lap. And if these dispute resolution mechanisms do not serve the initiative at large, the users and the stakeholders and the governments and the investors and the contractors and the companies will not be happy with how these things are handled. So with that in mind, we should be conscious that the dispute resolution component should cater for the needs of the users. And the needs are efficiency, time in terms of resolution of disputes, consistency and predictability in decision making, compliance with the expectations of the projects going forward to realize the vision. Recently in April 2019 and stuff, there is an annual event and conference there. And part of it you touched upon lately is that China has committed with the governments a lot of funds and resources to training of government officials, of practitioners on the Belt and Road Initiative and the expectations in relation to these matters. So that is more on the institutional and individual level. And a lot is being done on that front. On a more national level, micro level, states across the continent, as I mentioned, have been modernizing their investment laws, establishing proper practices within institutions. You mentioned the CASICA one. There's also the CIMAC in Morocco. There is the LASIAC and the LCA in Nigeria. There is in Kenya, the Nairobi International Arbitration Center. There is the Rwanda, the Kigali International Arbitration Center, and many others. The AFSA in South Africa, and as I mentioned, the CAJAC, which is specific to the Belt and Road. Many of these institutions have eyed the initiative, but we don't have yet, for example, formulated policies as to how they deal with that. And the reason being, the Belt and Road Initiative is not going to be a trial and error initiative in bringing on board those who do not have experience with this. They want this to be a success story. And that is where, for example, institutions like the ICC, which is playing a significant role in this, is in discussions with the Chinese government and other governments about how best to proceed with Belt and Road dispute management, advisory services, and resolution. And of course, we have the Hong Kong International Arbitration Center, there is the LCIA, and many others. So for the African institutions to be considered, they need to up their game. And by doing so, you need to have proper policies in place. You need to have proper and efficient administration of cases. You need to show that you have at least the regional expertise. Domestic expertise will not suffice. You need to have regional expertise to be able to be considered potentially as a forum for resolution of these disputes. Now, the element that is of help to bring, let's say, business to these institutions potentially is the applicable law element and the seat element. So African components of the BRI could be subject to local laws on the substance and not just simply laws of foreign jurisdictions, but could be subject to local laws, and developing African seats as a viable option, which means that the judiciary in those African seats should be well aware, not just of the initiative, of the intricacies of dispute resolution, be it arbitration, mediation, adjudication, or otherwise, so that when a dispute arises, contemporaneous or post-award, for example, in an arbitration, people will have trust and confidence in the decision-making process there. And if these components are put in place, and we are mindful of the CIR safe seat principles, which African jurisdictions could benefit from, we are going then to see more and more trust and confidence in African institutions in dealing with that. Now, what I want to caution against is that we need to separate African practitioners from African institutions. So what I'm saying here, it is not automatic that the only way for African practitioners to be considered as neutrals in dispute resolution processes is through African institutions. You can have international institutions embracing qualified, competent African practitioners, because that is part of the diversity initiative across the board globally. And then at the same time, another component is to bring African institutions on board. And here I think the African Union, the African Development Facility, and many other African initiatives could help showcase the expertise of African institutions and the work they're doing. For example, the Corsica has now crossed the threshold of about 1,400 cases since its establishment. KIAC has, in Kigali, has crossed the threshold of 100 cases. Nairobi is also doing a good job. Nigeria, which is a very large, if not the largest economy on the continent, but the most populous, obviously, in Africa, has a number of arbitration institutions and a number of dispute resolution centers that are credible and can do a very good job. And in doing so, I think they need to look into the future and not just look where things stand at the present. You need to have proper administration of cases, proper advanced rules in dispute settlement, be it arbitration, adjudication, or mediation. And I'm saying that because a component of the dispute resolution process that is almost virtually inexistent on the continent is adjudication rules for construction disputes. You need to have adjudication rules for these institutions and a training for adjudication practitioners, which, by the way, is not exclusive to lawyers, but engineers and other people who are well versed with the intricacies of adjudication. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. And I'll go into your questions because we also would like to take general questions. Is there any challenge? First of all, I thought we'll talk about procedure and then we'll come back to other things. But is there any challenge to having one legal framework for BRI projects and disputes, considering that Africa, we have countries that are common law and countries that are civil law? You know, that's something that we haven't dealt with, and it's something that we need to begin to talk about in Africa, because we have civil law countries and common law countries in Africa. And so, you know, we have OHADA, which is very active in the French-speaking civil law parts of Africa and other things, you know. So how do we marry having one? Is it possible to have one legal framework? Prof.
Sorry, Sola, the line was cutting. The question that I need to... Sorry?
No, I said, how do we marry civil law, common law, you know, considering that even in Africa, we have two clear types of law practices. There's a civil law element, there's a common law element, and we have both countries in Africa. So where do we start from with BRI, common law, civil law? Can we have one single legal framework? Is that possible?
Sure. Look, Sola, everything is possible. Let me say, Africa is very rich in terms of the multitude of legal systems. And civil and common law, yes, they dominate, but we also have customary laws. We also have Islamic laws. We have more on the Lusophone countries, speaking Portuguese and Spanish and stuff, so there is an impact. But broadly speaking, absolutely, the inherent head-to-head tension between civil and common law will continue to coexist. And I think this will normally influence the substantive part of the dispute, the approach to decision-making. So we get to make choices from the multitude of legal systems available. But what I think with the BRI and the Chinese and the latest discussions ongoing intergovernmental is that they want to ensure predictability and consistency in the decision-making. And in doing so, you want to have not just a one mindset, but sort of a homogeneity in terms of the approach. And part of doing that is detailed approach to resolution of disputes in relation to detailed contracts that are in place, perhaps guidance notes to dispute resolvers on how to apply the contracts in a way. And so developing a common set of principles. This is part of the initiative that they are working on at the moment. So what I think is that the discussion regarding civil and common law will continue and will continue to exist, because this is part of the identity of the legal systems across the continent. And I think it is not something that is a threat to the success of the BRI or even any other type of initiative in relation to disputes. It's more of available options. And I think part of the negotiations we'll be seeing in relation to governments and companies is what law will govern, what approach in relation to disputes as part of the overall macro level overview of the BRI initiative itself.
Okay. Thank you, Prof. Also, I'd like to ask, do we need specific procedural rules to govern proceedings in the BRI? Is there a need, or should we just carry on with the UNCITRAL rules or the different institutional rules? And talking about rules, you know, when you talk, there was something you said, and it brought to my mind, even for engineering contracts, you know, with engineering contracts, with engineering contracts, you have JCT, you have FIDIC. Is there a need for anything else, or do the BRI contracts, do they just fall into either FIDIC or JCT? And do we need specific procedural rules outside of the many that we already have to deal with BRI disputes?
So briefly, and I'll be very direct, on the procedural rules, I think definitely there will be a need for the sector-specific procedural rules based on principles of expedited resolution, the nature and vision of the BRI, as I mentioned, across the segments in many jurisdictions. So you will have that. For example, we've seen that in other sectors. In Malaysia, for example, the Asian International Arbitration Center has specific rules for Islamic finance disputes. And we know in the US, the AAA has sector-specific disputes for many types of initiatives, manufacturing and otherwise. So for the BRI, I see that part of the edge that African institutions, or perhaps institutions that want to be considered, is tailoring specific procedural rules for the BRI. So that is the immediate answer. On the substantive level, in relation to the forms of contracts, I don't think a specific form is needed, but I see that the BRI initiative is already spawning its own culture of substantive terms that are included as particular conditions for these types of projects across the board, be it transport, construction, or otherwise. So the existing forms cater for this, but I think the overly general procedural rules may not step up to cater for the expected needs of the BRI.
Okay. Well, thank you. Before we go into general questions, I'll ask the last question of Prof. Now, will dispute prevention in BRI jurisdiction be a priority for parties and countries? Dispute prevention, dispute avoidance, that's the new language we're having. It's not just resolving disputes, but preventing disputes and avoiding disputes.
Thank you, Sola. Again, very briefly, this ties in with what I mentioned earlier. We have to understand our role within the, let me call it the blockchain. Dispute resolvers tend to see the world from the lens that this is the focus of everyone. Whereas, as a matter of fact, it is simply there to cater for business needs. And definitely, the BRI initiative, governments, companies, and investors, they are into dispute avoidance, dispute management, and the last resort, you go into dispute resolution that is adversarial. It's simply like when you have an illness. The last thing you want to do is a surgery. You want to try to avoid and cure the illness. Then you try to use, for example, pills, or get to a general practitioner that will help you avoid an incision through surgery. And arbitration is the surgery. So definitely dispute avoidance is the new buzzword for users. And first of all, it's more timely and less cost and more cost effective, less time consuming. And I think this is part of the broad spectrum of dispute resolution services that institutions should offer. And part of the dispute avoidance, for example, in adjudication, you look at the DAAB, dispute avoidance boards in a way. This is a way of doing it. Having or constituting neutrals from the beginning of projects to look into problems as they arise and before they transpire into disputes is definitely another aspect. And then as a last resort, disputes are unavoidable. You will have a share of the resolution of disputes, but the share that will go through the pipeline could potentially be less, though more significant than what we see today. So definitely dispute avoidance is on the table. Definitely it is a priority, and we should be prepared as practitioners and as institutions and as states to have policies in place to cater for these needs in relation to dispute avoidance.
Thank you very much, Prof. Now I'm going to quickly look at the questions. Even though looking at the questions, it seems as if most of these have been answered one way or the other. I'm just going to run through them because there are one or two other things I just want to ask from the panelists. Now, how can BRI disputes benefit from the expertise of existing arbitration institutions? We've been talking about the institutions and how they can be involved. It's the institutions who have to find how they will be involved in the BRI disputes. We've heard from Dr. Blake about what ICC has done, is doing, what the Hong Kong International Arbitration Center is doing, and so many other international arbitration centers. So we can take a cue from that. What arbitration opportunities have arisen from BRI initiatives? I mean, that's what we've been talking about from the beginning, the opportunities that are available to all of us as arbitrators. But there's a lot that we have to do before we can take advantage of those opportunities. And that's one of the things we will be talking about quickly. The role institutions expect to play, we've talked about it when Dr. Blake talked about institutions. What are those things that Africans need to do to strengthen their institutions? We've talked about it. There's a role for them to play. And we can take a cue from what other institutions have been doing. I don't know if we've started doing any, I mean, the smaller institutions, maybe even the big ones in Africa, not many of them are doing anything yet with the BRI, having meetings, trying to set up collaborations, having small rules that are sector specific, even to BRI disputes. These are things that we need to do. Somebody asked about dispute avoidance, management. We've talked about that. What arbitration opportunities? A lot of people want to know about arbitration opportunities. And then somebody had asked earlier about the role of IT. I know that we had spoken about IT, AI. All these things are very important. And that leads me to ask again, what are the things we need to be doing? What are the things we need to be putting ourselves into, building capacity, even for this area of dispute resolution, dispute avoidance? I mean, we have dispute avoidance boards. How many of us know about dispute avoidance boards? How many of us are into adjudication? These are new areas we can start pushing ourselves towards. AI, IT, these areas, we will just talk about it. I thank you. Thank you, Dr. Mohammed. You have put in some of the names. Mr. Ejikoye, I wanted to know more about the Chamber of Commerce. Dr. Blake, there were some institutions you talked about.
Yes, I can. Just a moment.
Okay. Just help us.
Just a moment, Shola. In the institutions we're talking about involved in mediation and arbitration, I think in the charts, Professor Mohammed even listed them, and it was one of the things I said about CCPIT and CCOIC. It's very, very important that we equally key into all those organizations. Thank you.
Yes, but you haven't put the Chamber of Commerce, Mr. Ejikoye. Please help us put the Chamber of Commerce. That's
like the CCPIT, the full name is actually China Council for Promotion of International Trade. And the CCOIC.
No, not that one. The BRI Chamber of International Chamber of Commerce, that one.
SRCIC. SRCIC is the Silk Road Chamber of International Commerce.
Yes, type it into the chat box. My people want to know it, so that they will keep it. Please put it there for us.
Okay, I will do that.
Dr. Blake. Yes.
Okay, I'll do that right away.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Blake. You mentioned
Sola. Yes. Sola, can I just say very briefly, commenting on what Mohammed said last, I entirely agree with Mohammed. That being said, I just wanted to make one point about the hybrid between common and civil law systems, in a sense, or how the two could be married in a sense. We've seen it in previous soft law instruments, certainly in arbitration. The IBA rules on the taking of evidence in international arbitration, for example, are a product of a combination of civil and common law approaches to the taking of evidence, in a sense. Just, to provide that for some guidance that, this is not necessarily something that is impossible. It's not mutually exclusive in a sense. So if one were to put one's mind to it, one could possibly come up with a dispute resolution framework that would cater for a hybrid between the two legal systems. But the other point, I think, which is important, is a point that I raised, probably not as clearly as I could have, about some new arbitration institutions that have been created, amongst others, the Astana International Arbitration Center, which has been created in a free zone that is based on common law. And that is done in one of the BRI jurisdictions, ultimately. And the interesting lesson to be learned from this really is that in order to attract investment, and that might well also include BI-related investment to some extent, one is generally helped as a jurisdiction if one creates dispute resolution frameworks that are recognizable, so to speak, to the international investor, as it were. The DIFC and the ADGM in the UAE have done likewise, essentially, putting a common law system in the heart of a civil law ocean. So we have the ADGM courts and court system within onshore, carved out of onshore Abu Dhabi, and we've got the Dubai International Arbitration, the DIFC, the Dubai International Financial Center, carved out of Dubai. And the Dubai, the DIFC more specifically, has got the DIFC LCIA, which is a sister organization of the LCIA, and offers dispute resolution services for arbitrations that are, amongst others, seated in the DIFC. Likewise, you can have arbitration seated in the ADGM, and the great benefit is basically that you will have common law courts, essentially, as the courier courts in those arbitrations. Anyway, and then just to be very plain about this in terms of enforceability of the awards that come out of the DIFC or indeed the AGDM as free zones, as judicial free zones, there are certain, laws in place. Example is given Article 7 of the Judicial Authority Law, which essentially provides for an area of free movement of judicial instruments between onshore and offshore courts, including ratified awards. So an award that's rendered in the DIFC can be easily exported and move freely into onshore Dubai for onward execution regionally, or indeed a DIFC award or an AGGM award, could be enforced under the New York Convention further afield. Anyway, I just mentioned this in terms of the experiments that have been started by other jurisdictions between common and civil law legal systems and how they can
round up now. They're going to cut us down now. Thank you very much, Dr. Blake. Thank you very much. One last thing I want to say for everybody attending this, one thing I've taken away is that there's a lot of capacity we need to build. Now, there are courses on adjudication. So plan for 2021. We attend these courses, these conferences, so that we can enrich our practices. I think we need to start looking about trainings and capacity buildings in the areas of adjudication, in the areas of mediation, in the areas of dispute avoidance. There are dispute avoidance boards, and in the area of the BRI itself. I hope that in 2021, the CIR will be able to work with all my esteemed panelists, with Kasika, to start putting trainings together for building our capacity in the area of BRI disputes, because it will surely come. We cannot be spending, or they're not spending 1.something trillion and everything will go smoothly. So there is something for every one of us. So I hope that in 2021, Prof. Dr. Blake, Mr. Ejikoya, we will be calling on you for small webinars, small short courses. I hope you will be available. Mr. Ejikoya, do I hear a yes or a no? Mr. Ejikoya, will you be available?
Yeah, I didn't catch. Yes, I will, yes.
I was asking that in 2021, we will start putting together short courses, webinars to prepare us to be able to get on the BRI road.
You just said a few minutes ago.
Will you be available? Okay. I was asking, will you be available for us?
Yes, I will, definitely. You've been a very fine host.
Prof, can we call upon you next year?
Shola, you know, it's always a great pleasure. Delighted. I just hope that we will be permitted to do it physically in person.
I know.
We are longing for this. If not, then virtually we will do it. And I would be delighted to be part of it.
1.5 hours is not enough for this. We need more time. Dr. Blake will be calling upon you. I hope you will be available in 2021.
Absolutely, Sola. It will be my pleasure. Thank you very much.
I have a commitment. I hope my people in CIAB are hearing this. We have a commitment from the three of them. We will explore this issue in more detail. $1.something trillion will not just flow past. We will explore it in more details, and we'll see how we can get a piece of the pie, get on the road, get on the waterways, maritime, roads, transport, infrastructure. Let's find out how. So we'll see you in 2021. Thank you very much for coming to this panel, my panelists. Thank you very much for all those who have attended. I am sure you have been able to take something away. I'm sure you have started scratching your head. Where is my part in all these figures that Prof talked about? Well, it's time to end our panel, and I want to say thank you to my coordinator. He was pushing in all the questions. Mohammed Adelodo, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Mekia. Thank you to the whole team in Abuja. Rev Doc, thank you for reminding me that I was sending my chats to everybody. Thank you, everybody. This has been interesting. I hope you all enjoyed it, and we hope to see ourselves next year, next conference. By the grace of God, it's going to be physical. And by the grace of God, we'll all be alive till then. Wherever you are in the world, stay safe.